I was 32 the night my father slid a white envelope across the dinner table to my brother. $60,000, a down payment. And when I asked, quietly, what my own plans might look like, my mother folded her napkin and said, "You can rent somewhere, honey. You've always been fine." She said it the way you'd tell a waitress the food was fine. My brother got a house that night. I got a compliment sharp enough to shave with. What I did over the next 18 months, my family never saw coming. And 2 years later, at that same table, on that same tablecloth, they asked me for something that still takes my breath away. My name is Jordan Holloway. This is where it started, a dining room in Kettering, Ohio, pot roast, an envelope, and a sentence my mother thought was kindness. You need the history first. In my family, money flowed downhill, and downhill was always my brother Kyle. 4 years older than me, and every disaster of his came with a rescue attached. A totaled car at 19, forgiven college loans at 22, a 5-figure credit card laid out at 28. Nobody explained the rule. I learned it the way you learn a stove is hot. I never drowned. I worked my way through nursing school, took a night shift job in the pediatric ICU in Dayton, and held other people's babies through the worst nights of their lives before driving home to clip coupons. My rent was cheap. My car was 12 years old. And by the night of that envelope, I had $48,000 saved, $500 at a time, since I was 23. Nobody knew. In my family, having money you didn't need was like leaving a porch light on in daylight. Nobody saw the point. That Sunday, Kyle talked for 20 minutes about a 4-bedroom house with granite countertops. He mentioned 3 separate times like a spell. Then my father reached into his jacket. $60,000 from the retirement account. My mother's hands were folded like she was in church. I sat there doing arithmetic I couldn't stop. That envelope was years of my night shifts. I asked carefully if there might be help for me one day too. My mother patted my hand. "You can rent somewhere, honey. You've always been fine." Kyle laughed, not meanly, the way you laugh when the world agrees with you. Someone changed the subject to countertops. I ate my pot roast and said nothing. But under that tablecloth, something in me quietly closed a door and locked it. That night, above the laundromat where the dryers thumped under my floor, I sat down with a legal pad and wrote a number. 48,212. Underneath it, I wrote what I knew: Dayton was one of the cheapest markets in the country, and I was done asking anyone at that table for anything, ever. It didn't feel hot. It felt like turning off a faucet that had been dripping my whole life. The next morning, I called my credit union. A loan officer named Denise, chewing gum through the whole call, ran my numbers and came back with a figure well below what I'd hoped. A nurse's salary is a nurse's salary. I decided the bank's number would be enough because I'd make it enough. I found my answer in a church basement off Wayne Avenue at the Greater Dayton Real Estate Investors Association. Folding chairs, burnt coffee, a laminated sign-in sheet. In the corner sat an old man in a Carhartt jacket who said almost nothing and got treated like a bishop when he did. Earl Novick, 71, 40 years a landlord. I told him I wanted a duplex, live in half, rent the other. He looked at me like I was a parking meter. "Everybody wants to be a landlord," he said, until a toilet calls them at 2 a.m. Then he walked off. He hadn't told me it was a bad idea. He'd told me the price. Prices I understood. It took 3 meetings before Earl remembered my name. By May, I'd learned the term that would root my whole life, house hacking, and found a listing that smelled, in every sense, like a beginning. But first came Kyle's housewarming. 60 people, balloons on the mailbox, my mother giving tour like a docent. "Feel this countertop," she kept saying. My aunt asked gently when I'd stop renting and settle down. Then my mother raised a glass. "To family, taking care of family, that's what we do." Everyone drank. I spent the next hour clearing plates, the way I always did at every family event I've ever attended. That night, back above the laundromat, I found it on a listing site, an 11-day-old 1924 brick duplex on Wren Street, 1 unit occupied, 1 vacant, needing TLC. which is realtor for bring a flashlight. $148,500. I looked at those photos until 2 a.m. family takes care of family, my mother had said. I decided to become my own. The numbers worked. An FHA loan needed just 3.5% down, about $5,200, and the occupied unit rented for $850 a month to a longtime tenant, Miss Patris. My whole payment would land around $1,140. The house would practically pay me to live in it. I did one last honest thing. I called my father, not my mother, and asked him to walk the property with me Saturday, check the wiring, the furnace. There was a pause. I could have parked a truck in. Then, "Well, sure, kiddo." He sounded glad, like a man who'd been waiting to be asked something and didn't know it. Saturday came with rain. At 10:15, a text. Kyle's water heater had burst, a house he'd owned barely a month. "Rain check, kiddo." I later learned Kyle had nicked the valve hanging a bike rack. That morning, all I knew was the arithmetic again. His emergency, my rain check, always in that order. I went in alone. The inspector found knob and tube wiring in the ceiling, not dangerous if left alone, but insurers hate it, and it would cost $6,500 to fix. I'd spent months reading. I knew it was leverage. I wrote the seller a calm letter demanding $6,500 off at closing, priced the walk into my voice, and they took it. In June, the underwriter cleared me. I signed 60-some pages alone, in a title office next to a vape shop, reading every line because nobody was coming to catch my mistakes. The title officer asked if we were waiting on a husband, a parent, a realtor. "It's just me," I said. She said, "Good for you," in the voice people use for dogs who can shake. Then a small brass key sat in my palm, and I was a homeowner, and nobody on earth knew except a gum-chewing loan officer and the state of Ohio. 19 days later, at 2 a.m., Miss Patris's toilet broke. I fixed it myself in my scrubs with a wrench and a phone propped up playing a repair video. That was my education. That whole summer I patched plaster after night shifts, learned paint is a love language, mowed my own lawn until neighbors stopped watching me like a rerun, and started bringing zucchini. My personal cost of housing dropped to $290 a month, less than half my old rent, and I owned the roof over both our heads. I kept going to Sunday dinners and kept my mouth shut, until one September evening I tested the water. Between the salad and the roast, I said I'd been studying property, thinking about rentals. My mother laughed, not cruelly, the way you laugh at a child who says she'll be an astronaut. "On a nurse's salary, honey, the taxes alone." My father told a story about a neighbor's rental and raccoons. Kyle talked about crown molding. The balloon drifted off unnoticed. I made a decision that night I'd keep for a year and a half. They'd answered my question, and I wouldn't ask it again. That October, I showed Earl my numbers, real spreadsheets, 4 months of them. He read every line, crossed out my repair reserve for a bigger one, and finally looked at me properly for the first time. "You live in the ugly unit," he said. "I do. You fix your own toilets." Something happened in his face that, on another man, might have been a smile. From then on, I had a standing seat beside him and a running seminar on vacancy math and capital expenditure. Once, and only once, he told me something personal. "I gave my son everything. First truck, first house, laid out his restaurant twice. He's 51 now, doesn't return my calls. Help that never asks you to grow isn't help." I learned that $200,000 too late. Property number 2 came in October, a 2-bedroom estate sale for $85,000, as is, meaning carpet with a biography. I financed it conventionally, did my own demolition, and around then ran into Kyle at the hardware store loading a $600 pizza oven onto a cart, funded by a card with our mother's name on it. Talking about flipping a house with his buddy Deke. He never once asked what I was doing there in my demolition clothes. I watched him wheel that oven out and thought, he's going to get hurt. That November, I found an old wooden key rack in a box in the cellar, 4 brass hooks, hand-burned roses. I sanded it, oiled it, hung it by my back door, dead level. On the first hook went the Wren Street key. On the second, marigolds. And standing there looking at the two empty hooks, I heard my mother's voice, "You've always been fine." I decided to take that word literally. Fine would mean four. 4 hooks, 4 keys, not $1 of anyone's envelope. 1 year for the other two, I said out loud, to the only witness I trusted, the empty kitchen. That Thanksgiving, at Kyle's, over pie, he announced he and Deke were flipping a house in Trotwood, funded by a $38,000 home equity line against his own home. My parents glowed. My mother told the table he'd always had the vision. I sat there holding 2 rental properties and a spreadsheet Earl had personally corrected, and said, "Pass the beans." Leaving that night, my father pressed a folded 50 into my hand in the dark. Gas money, don't tell your mother, I still have that bill. In April, I refinanced Marigold, pulled $25,000 in tax-free cash from the equity I'd built, and put it down on a third property in May, a bungalow near a hospital shuttle stop. Rented before the paint cured. The third key went up. Then Earl called, the first time I'd ever heard him use a phone, and showed me his own first building. A duplex he'd been packing up all winter to hand off before moving to Arizona to be near his daughter. He offered to carry the mortgage himself at 10% down, no bank, no circus, on one condition: bring him every book, every ledger, clean or nothing. I spread 2 years of my financial life across his kitchen table. He read for 2 hours, tapped my original legal pad once with his thumbnail, and said, "Tuesday, my attorney's office." That December, the 4th key went up. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried for 30 seconds, hard and out of nowhere. Then I made tea. In February, a business reporter named Renee Vasquez called, having heard about me at the REIA meetings for a year. She wanted to write my story. I almost said no. Newsprint is permanent, and my aunt has taken that paper since 1989. But I thought of a friend's question from months back, asked while we sat on paint buckets. Who exactly are you proving this to? I'd been quietly building a courtroom of evidence, waiting for my family to finally rule I'd been worth backing all along. That courtroom was never going to convene on its own. I said yes, on one condition: every number gets fact-checked. The story ran on a Thursday, front page of the business section. A nurse who built a 4-property portfolio in 18 months on rent money. By 7 a.m., my phone was a slot machine of texts. My aunt forwarded the page to the family group chat. Kyle sent a thumbs up without reading past the headline. My mother said nothing, not that day, not through the whole weekend. On the 4th day, she summoned me. My parents stood in the kitchen like a tribunal. 2 years you've been sneaking around, letting your own mother find out from Sharon. You lied to this family. Not built, not did, lied. My father read the article twice in silence, moving his lips at the numbers. Nobody lied, Mom, I said. You never asked. Kyle, leaning against the counter, snorted. So what, you finally got yourself a house? Congratulations. I looked at my 38-year-old brother standing in granite he never paid for and asked quietly, which one? You could hear the refrigerator. The fallout came fast: cousins needing loans, a man from church with a storage unit scheme, my mother telling the aunts. We never had to worry about Jordan. That girl always lands on her feet, turning my whole secret into her own peace of mind. But that Thursday, my father's truck pulled up outside Wren Street. He didn't come in. He looked at the brickwork and said, "Your grandfather laid brick on half this street, rewired most of it too. You've got his hands." Then he left before I trusted my voice. Kyle came alone one Sunday, something that had never happened in our lives. Turning his cap in his hands at my table, he told me everything. He'd lost his real job in November, the consulting had been fiction for years, the Trotwood flip was dead weight. He was 2.5 payments behind on his own house. I had a $60,000 head start, he said, and I'm the one drowning. I didn't say what I was thinking. It wasn't the night for it. 3 days later, my mother beat the family meeting with a coffee cake and a request for a tour. In my kitchen, in front of the key rack, She told me a story I'd never heard in 34 years. Her own father's farm had gone entirely to her brother when she was 24. Because Gary needed it. "You've got Dennis," her father had told her. "You'll be fine," she said it like it hadn't echoed at all. Then on her way out, casual as a coaster. "Sunday then, Kyle's drowning. Bring your checkbook." Same table, same tablecloth, my folding chair from the garage. After 20 minutes of small talk, my father slid a manila folder across. A refinance plan to fold Kyle's equity line into a manageable payment, needing my signature as co-signer. "It costs you nothing," my mother said, eyes wet certain. "You wanted to be part of this family. This is what family does. This is your moment." I asked the questions a nurse asks taking vitals. The payoff amount, how many payments behind, Kyle's actual current income. On paper, I could survive signing it. I could afford for the first time to simply buy their love. I picked up the pen, and then I set it back down. "No," I said. "I'm not signing and I'm not writing a check. But hear the rest, because I'm not done." I turned to my brother and offered him something real instead. Every Sunday, my kitchen table, we'd list his house at a price to actually sell. Call the bank about hardship terms before it hit collections. Build a budget off his real income. And when Marigold turned over in June, he could apply like anyone else, pay a deposit, sign a standard lease, and learn exactly what everything costs, the one thing this family had never once let him find out. My mother stood so fast her chair barked against the floor. "He's your brother, not an applicant. And your own brother is drowning, and you, after everything." She ran out of sentence right at the edge of a thing she'd never had to say out loud before. Because the family ledger had always simply been obeyed. I stood too calmly. "You're right, Mom, I do have 4 houses, and you never once had to worry about me. I know that's your compliment, so hear mine, I'm fine." I made sure of it myself, because somebody at this table had to be. I put on my coat. My father followed me out into the cold, hatless, and said only, "Send Kyle the Sunday Times." That was everything he had, and also nearly everything. I drove home with the radio off, waiting for the collapse that never came. Instead, standing in my dark kitchen, I felt something lighter than I'd ever felt. 4 brass hooks catching the streetlight, 4 keys, no jury left to convene. Because the verdict in Kettering had been written before I was born, in a farmhouse kitchen near Piqua, the day they handed my mother her own napkin. You can't win a case in that courtroom. You can only stop filing. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed. "Kyle, no apology needed." "What time Sunday?" I texted back, 9. "Bring your bank statements," and hung my car key on the first hook, right where it fit. Here's where everyone landed. Sycamore Trail sold that June for $282,000. After every payoff, Kyle walked away with a little over $6,000, and for the first time in his adult life, 0 debt. The Trotwood flip sold for less than they owed. His share came to nothing. He got a forklift job with benefits, filled out my rental application like everyone else, and I made him wait 2 days for the answer, which my friend Tanya still calls petty. She's right. I don't regret it. He moved into Marigold with a standard lease and a deposit he paid himself, and 4 months running, his rent has come in early. Some Sundays my father's truck is already at my curb before Kyle arrives, because he's decided, without announcement, that my gutters and outlets require his personal supervision. My mother hasn't set foot on Wren Street since the coffee cake. In August, a birthday card came in her round church bulletin hand. Inside it said only, "Mom," no note. I've stopped expecting her to close that ledger, because I understand now whose hands first opened it, and what it cost her to survive believing it was love. Earl sends postcards from Arizona with no greeting, just sentences. The last one read, "Grandkid can swim now, book still clean." They are Earl. All 6 doors, cash flowing, boring as a heartbeat, the highest compliment in this business. Last Sunday I was on my porch with coffee in the cold gold, light, Wren Street, does better than any street I own, when Kyle's truck pulled up early. He got out with his binder and a bag of donuts. looked up at me on the steps my grandfather's brick built, and grinned. "Hey, you home?" I looked through the window at 4 brass hooks catching the morning sun, 4 keys hanging like notes in a cord, plus a car key that has no idea how it earned its place there. And I said it, I said it. "Which one?" He laughed and climbed my steps, and we went inside to do the work. Being fine was never the consolation prize they handed me. It was the inheritance I wrote for myself, 1 key at a time, and nobody gets to slide it across a table, and nobody gets to take it back.